July 15th, 2026. At exactly 6 a.m. Eastern Time this morning, United States Central Command began launching waves of strikes against Iran. Not a single package, not a targeted response to a specific provocation. Waves. The word is in the official statement. Waves of American air power arriving over Iranian territory in the pre-dawn darkness, as the sun was not yet above the horizon, as the IRGC's degraded radar infrastructure was trying to track contacts that its depleted command network could no longer process at the speed the threat environment required. This is now what the mornings look like in Iran. The CENTCOM announcement came at 6:22 a.m. Eastern. Strikes had already been underway for 22 minutes. By the time the public knew the strikes were happening, they were already happening. By the time Iranian state media could formulate a denial, the bomb craters were already cooling. This is not a crisis. This is a campaign. A daily campaign, now entering its second week, with no announced end date and a target list that continues to grow as Iranian military installations are identified, located, fixed in the ISR picture, and struck before they can be relocated or hardened. The memorandum of understanding is gone. The ceasefire is gone. What remains is the operational reality of daily American bombing runs against a country whose power grid is faltering, whose ports are under naval blockade, whose supply corridors have been severed, and whose nuclear facility under a mountain near Natanz has been named publicly by the American president as the next target in the sequence. And Iran's response to all of this, the response from an institution that has spent 40 years telling the world that it cannot be defeated, that it will never capitulate, that it stands as the armed vanguard of Islamic resistance against American and Zionist aggression, is to propose in Parliament that its forces kidnap American soldiers and hold them hostage. Let's back all the way up, because the distance between where this conflict started and where it stands on the morning of July 15th, 2026, is the distance between an institution that believed it held strategic leverage and an institution that is now proposing hostage-taking as its next operational move. That distance tells the story more clearly than any individual strike package. The trigger for the resumption of full-scale hostilities was Iran's decision, in the final hours of the deadline period, to attack 3 commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz and formally declare the waterway closed to all maritime traffic. The decision was calculated, not reactive, not improvised, but a deliberate strategic choice to breach the memorandum of understanding rather than comply with it, made in the belief that the pattern of previous conflict cycles would repeat. Strike, absorb the American response, call for negotiations through Qatar or Oman. Get a ceasefire that preserves the institutional capacity for the next cycle. The playbook had worked before. The IRGC ran it again. The Trump administration did not follow the playbook. Instead of a calibrated, punitive response followed by a diplomatic opening, CENTCOM began launching strike packages that escalated in scale from night to night. 80 targets on night 1, 90 on night 2, with geographic expansion that moved the target envelope from the coastal areas to the Iranian interior. The oil license was revoked simultaneously. The port blockade was reinstated, the War Powers notification was filed, and the American president publicly named Pickaxe Mountain, the underground nuclear facility near Natanz, as the next objective in a live radio interview, telling the Iranians directly that the facility would be taken out and there was not a damn thing they could do about it. Iran's playbook has no chapter for this scenario. The previous conflict cycles all operated within a framework that preserved certain thresholds, certain target categories that remained off the board, certain escalatory actions that neither side took because both sides understood that taking them would remove the diplomatic runway that allowed the pause and reset pattern to function. The current American campaign has crossed every one of those thresholds sequentially. Nuclear facility strikes, rail corridor destruction, port blockade, daily bombing tempo, and now the explicit announcement of targeting the most sensitive single site in Iran's nuclear program. The playbook that the IRGC was running assumed a framework that no longer exists. Now the operational picture of July 15th as it stands this morning. Chabahar continues to burn. The footage from the port city shows what sustained targeting of a single facility looks like in the before and after satellite imagery that CENTCOM has been releasing alongside its strike announcements. In the before, the port infrastructure intact, the control tower standing, the marine facilities operational. In the after, smoke columns, blast craters, structures that no longer exist in the form they existed in hours earlier. The main control tower at Chabahar, the facility that intelligence reporting confirmed was being used by the IRGC not for legitimate maritime navigation, but as a targeting and coordination node for drone and missile strikes against commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, has been a persistent target across multiple strike packages, with new footage confirming continued impact and continued structural damage with each successive wave. Chabahar matters beyond the tactical damage to a port facility. It was Iran's strategic insurance, the deepwater Indian Ocean port that gave the Islamic Republic maritime access that bypassed the Strait of Hormuz entirely. Ships that called at Chabahar did not need to transit the contested waterway. The port connected Iran to Central Asian trade routes through Afghanistan and gave the IRGC a logistics channel that was, in theory, insulated from Persian Gulf pressure. The sustained American targeting of Chabahar is the systematic removal of that insurance, the elimination of the backup before the primary has fully collapsed, ensuring that when the Persian Gulf becomes fully untenable for Iranian commercial and military maritime operations, there is no functional alternative that Iran can point to and say, we can route around the pressure. Shiraz is being hit this morning. The underground facilities beneath the Shiraz region, assessed to hold drone stockpiles and missile inventory, are under strike. The choice of Shiraz as a target category in the current phase represents the geographic and structural expansion of the campaign beyond the coastal and port-adjacent targets that dominated the first nights. Underground facilities holding drones and missiles are not coastal radar arrays. They are the stored inventory, the weapons that have not yet been loaded onto launchers, the Shahed drone stockpiles that have been supplying the waves of Iranian attacks on Gulf Arab states. Destroying the stored inventory removes launch capacity that the IRGC would otherwise be drawing on as the conflict extends. It is not just degrading what Iran has, it is preventing Iran from reconstituting what it has lost. Sarbandar and Mahshahr in Khuzestan province were struck overnight. The target, an underground missile facility. Witnesses reported powerful explosions that shook the area. Khuzestan province is strategically significant beyond its geography. It is the heart of Iran's oil production infrastructure. The province where the majority of Iranian petroleum reserves are located, and an area with a significant Arab minority population that has historically been a source of domestic political tension for the regime. Striking a missile facility in Khuzestan is a military action in a province that the IRGC watches with particular domestic anxiety in addition to its military significance. The overnight strikes from July 14th that CENTCOM announced this morning add the timeline that puts the current morning's operations in full context. CENTCOM completed additional rounds of strikes at 10:15 p.m. Eastern on July 14th, hitting dozens of military targets near the Strait of Hormuz in a 7-hour strike wave. 7 hours. U.S. fighter aircraft, drones, and naval vessels launched precision munitions against Iranian missile sites, drone sites, naval capabilities, and coastal defense infrastructure across a continuous 7-hour operational window. This is not a strike package. This is a sustained air and naval campaign running through the night with the kind of operational endurance that requires the full tanker and ISR support architecture to sustain. The refueling tankers confirmed in open source tracking are the visible signature of this endurance requirement. Without continuous aerial refueling, the fighter aircraft that are executing these 7-hour sustained operations cannot remain on station at the distances and altitudes required. Every tanker orbit visible on tracking represents dozens of additional hours of strike capability that the fighter and bomber packages can sustain before returning to base. The P-8 Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft confirmed in open source tracking over the operational area is not there for show. The P-8 is the Navy's primary submarine hunting platform, an aircraft specifically designed to detect, track, and engage submarines using sonobuoys, magnetic anomaly detectors, and torpedoes. Its presence in the operational area tells you something important about the full scope of American naval assets involved in this campaign, including those operating beneath the surface that no open-source tracking reveals. And then the before and after satellite imagery that CENTCOM released alongside the July 14th strike confirmation. In the before image, the Iranian installation is intact, infrastructure present, systems in place, the site functioning as a military facility. In the after image, everything is gone. Not damaged, not degraded, gone. Blast craters where structures stood. Cleared ground where equipment had been positioned. The completeness of the destruction in the after image is itself a message, not just to the IRGC commanders whose facility this was, but to every Iranian military planner who is looking at satellite imagery of their own installations and calculating what their before and after would look like when it arrives. The airport defenses in the strike footage deserve specific analysis because of what they indicate about American operational planning beyond the current phase. The footage shows strikes landing adjacent to runway infrastructure, targeting the defensive positions around an Iranian airport rather than the runway itself. The runway blockaded by the Iranians, obstacles placed across the tarmac to prevent American aircraft from landing, is being preserved while the defenses around it are removed. You do not take out airport defenses adjacent to a runway while leaving the runway itself intact unless you are thinking about whether that runway might have a future operational use. The clearing of airport defenses around an Iranian facility while leaving the landing surface available is not a detail the analytical community should pass over without noting what category of operation it might facilitate. Now, Iran's retaliatory capacity and what the current exchange reveals about how much of it remains functional. Iran attacked Bahrain heavily overnight, the most recent documented wave of drone and missile fire against the Gulf Arab state that has been on the receiving end of consistent Iranian targeting since the conflict resumed. Bahrain's air defense systems intercepted and destroyed several Iranian aerial attacks. Several, not all. The qualifier matters. Iran continues to penetrate Gulf Arab air defenses with individual assets, which means the Shahed drone and ballistic missile inventory is not yet exhausted, the launch capability is not yet fully eliminated, and some portion of what Iran fires continues to reach its destination. But the ratio, the number of Iranian weapons that are intercepted versus the number that get through, runs heavily against Iran, and every intercepted weapon represents a cost Iran pays without achieving the effect it launched for. The IRGC is claiming strikes on a list of American military assets in Kuwait that would represent, if confirmed, the most consequential Iranian retaliation since the conflict resumed. The claim targets a U.S. satellite communications center, air defense radar systems, a Patriot air defense complex, a U.S. military base readiness facility, and HIMARS multiple rocket launcher platforms. This is a target list that, if accurately struck, would represent significant degradation of American military capability in Kuwait. The HIMARS claim deserves specific attention because of what the system represents in the broader American operational posture. The High Mobility Artillery Rocket System is the precision long-range strike platform that the United States has been deploying in theater. If IRGC weapons successfully struck HIMARS platforms in Kuwait, it would represent a genuine military achievement, the elimination of a precision strike capability that the American order of battle relies on. But the IRGC's claim history across this conflict runs heavily against the credibility of its announced target successes. The pattern is consistent. Iran claims strikes on specific high-value military systems. The operational evidence from independent sources confirms a fraction of the claimed effects, and the discrepancy between the claim and the confirmed reality is absorbed into the IRGC's domestic narrative without correction. The honest analytical assessment of the IRGC's Kuwait claims is this: treat them with appropriate skepticism until corroboration from non-Iranian sources is available. Now Pickaxe Mountain. Because the American president has now reiterated in multiple public statements that the facility will be taken out, and the Iranian response to that reiteration has produced the most analytically significant thing Iran has said since the conflict resumed. An Iranian official warned publicly that the region will turn to hell if the United States strikes Pickaxe Mountain. The official called it the most fortified nuclear facility in the world and said it cannot be touched. Two separate claims in that statement. One is a threat that striking the facility produces consequences for the entire region. The other is an assertion that the physical hardening of the facility makes it impervious to American strike capability. The second claim first. The assertion that Pickaxe Mountain cannot be touched is a statement about the physical hardening of the underground facility near Natanz, the depth of the tunnels, the thickness of the reinforced concrete, the engineering that went into building a nuclear facility specifically designed to survive the kind of conventional bunker-busting strikes that previous generations of American munitions could deliver. Iran's nuclear engineers know the specification of every American penetrating weapon that has been in the inventory since the facility was built. They have designed the depth and the hardening against those specifications. The claim of invulnerability is based on their assessment that they have gone deep enough and thick enough to survive what the American military can deliver. That assessment may not account for the massive ordnance penetrator, the 30,000-pound bunker-busting weapon carried by the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, which penetrates approximately 200 feet of reinforced concrete before detonating. If the Iranian facility's hardening was designed against previous generation bunker busters, and if the MOP's penetration depth exceeds what the Iranian engineers built against, then the claim of invulnerability is based on a capability assessment that is out of date. The United States government has had decades to refine its penetrating munitions specifically for this target category. The confidence with which the American president announces the targeting of Pickaxe Mountain in public, naming it by name, telling the Iranians it is coming, reflects either certainty about the capability to destroy it or a sophisticated psychological operation designed to force Iran to make decisions about the facility under the pressure of an announced timeline. Both possibilities produce consequences. If the capability is real, the strike eliminates the most sensitive component of Iran's nuclear program in a way that sets the program back by a decade or more. If the announcement is designed to create psychological pressure, it forces Iranian decision-makers to move personnel and material from the facility, potentially revealing previously unknown aspects of the program's layout and supply chain, while consuming IRGC command bandwidth and generating internal institutional debate that further fragments the already fractured decision-making structure. Now the threat that has emerged from inside the Iranian parliament that changes the character of the conflict if it is executed. An Iranian member of parliament and a former Iranian foreign minister have proposed publicly that Iran launch attacks on American military bases in the region and kidnap American troops to hold as hostages. The hostage proposal is not operationally serious in the military sense. American forces are trained, armed, and operationally prepared for exactly the kind of threat environment that an IRGC operation against a U.S. base would represent, and the outcome of any direct armed engagement between IRGC forces and American combat soldiers is not analytically ambiguous. What the proposal is a political signal of extreme desperation. When elected officials in a government at war begin publicly proposing hostage-taking as a strategic option, they are revealing that the option set available to that government has contracted to the point where actions that were previously understood to be catastrophically escalatory are now being discussed as viable alternatives. The American response to a successful hostage-taking of American military personnel would not resemble anything in the current conflict. The entire framework of the campaign, the measured escalation, the daily bombing tempo, the targeted degradation of military infrastructure, would be replaced by a different kind of response. The response to American soldiers being taken hostage by Iranian forces would be calibrated not against what Iran's air defense can handle, but against what the complete elimination of the IRGC's ability to function as a military institution looks like. The Iranian parliament member who proposed this option either does not understand this, or does understand it, and has concluded that the trajectory of the current conflict is more threatening to the regime's survival than the alternative would be. Either interpretation describes a government that has lost the strategic orientation required to make decisions that serve its own survival interests. Now, Israel, because the Israeli assessment of where this conflict is heading represents the most strategically informed external analysis of the trajectory that is publicly available. Israeli intelligence and military leadership are assessing that the United States is ramping up preparations for a possible return to full-scale war with Iran, potentially within weeks. One senior Israeli source said the statement that analysts of this conflict have been working around since the ceasefire began: there will be a war. The only question is when. The collapse of the Memorandum of Understanding, the confrontation over the Strait of Hormuz, and Tehran's latest moves, including the hostage-taking proposal from Parliament, are being read in Jerusalem as signs of escalation that is not going to reverse before it reaches the threshold of a full-scale conflict that Israel will enter directly. The Israeli calculation about when to formally re-enter the conflict has been consistent throughout this cycle. The IDF wants to enter when the IRGC's defensive capacity is maximally degraded by the American campaign, not before. The 7 hours of continuous American strikes on the night of July 14th. The wave strikes beginning at 6:00 a.m. on July 15th. The daily bombing tempo that has reduced Iranian air defense coverage, eliminated radar sites, destroyed command nodes, and killed named IRGC commanders. Each day of continued American bombardment represents another day that Israel can enter a conflict in which Iran's ability to mount a coherent military response is diminished. The Israeli when is being calculated against the American degradation curve. And the assessment from Jerusalem that full-scale war is coming within weeks suggests that the Israeli calculation has placed that threshold closer than the public communications have been indicating. Now the Strait of Hormuz, because it remains the central contested terrain of this conflict, even as the strike geography has expanded dramatically. The strait remains formally closed per IRGC declaration. Over the past 24 hours, the IRGC Navy fired at 2 ships. Very few commercial vessels are transiting. The closure is not complete in the physical sense. American naval power does not allow a 21-mile waterway to be fully sealed against all transit, but the commercial shipping risk environment is severe enough that the market has functionally self-blockaded. Insurance premiums for vessels transiting the strait have reached levels that make many shipments economically unviable regardless of the military risk calculus. Shipping companies are routing around the strait through longer, more expensive alternatives. The disruption to global oil markets and commercial shipping logistics is real and ongoing, even without physical interception of every vessel that might attempt transit. The P-8 Poseidon confirmed in open-source tracking over the operational area is doing something that deserves more analytical attention than the strike footage tends to receive. The P-8 is the Navy's maritime patrol aircraft. The platform specifically designed to conduct anti-submarine warfare, to detect and track submarines, to coordinate with surface vessels and other assets in the prosecution of underwater threats. Its presence in the operational area confirms that American naval force posture includes submarine assets operating in the theater, whether as Tomahawk launch platforms for the ongoing land attack campaign or as a hedge against any Iranian submarine capability that might pose a threat to American surface vessels. The P-8's presence is the above-the-surface indicator of a below-the-surface operational picture that open-source tracking cannot fully reveal. Now the 3 converging pressure tracks as they stand on the morning of July 15th, because on this day they are operating with more intensity and with more reinforcing interaction than at any previous point in this conflict cycle. The military pressure track has now achieved daily operational tempo with wave strikes beginning at 6 a.m. on July 15th, following a 7-hour strike wave the previous night. Chabahar is burning. Shiraz is under attack. Khuzestan province's underground missile facilities are being struck. The before and after imagery shows complete destruction at targeted sites. Iranian airport defenses are being cleared. The P-8 is in the air. And Pickaxe Mountain has been named repeatedly, publicly, with no indication that the naming is anything other than a statement of operational intent. The financial pressure track has Iran's ports under complete blockade, oil license revoked, rail corridor severed, Chabahar degraded, and the gray market for Iranian oil operating under the enhanced risk premium that the military campaign and sanctions intensification have created. The IRGC's procurement budget is being squeezed from every direction simultaneously with no visible mechanism for relief. The psychological pressure track is operating through the hostage proposal from the Iranian parliament, a statement that tells every analyst and every Iranian military commander watching the conflict that the institutional leadership has contracted its option, set to the point where acts of war that guarantee catastrophic American retaliation are being discussed in public forums as strategic alternatives. The psychological effect of watching your own government's legislature propose hostage-taking as a viable option is not confined to the external observer. It is experienced internally by every IRGC officer, every Iranian military planner, and every Iranian citizen who understands what the American response to that option would look like. The honest strategic assessment is this. Iran, on July 15, 2026, is being struck in waves from dawn, is retaliating with drones and missiles that are being intercepted at high rates by Gulf Arab and American air defense networks, is claiming military successes in Kuwait that have not been independently confirmed, is watching its most sensitive nuclear facility be named publicly as an upcoming American target, and is producing parliamentary proposals for hostage-taking as a strategic response option. The IRGC has not found the action that changes the operational balance. Every day of the current campaign reduces the range of actions available to it while increasing the number of Iranian military assets destroyed, the number of IRGC commanders killed, and the degree to which the institution's logistics and supply chain have been severed. The structural risk is the thing that makes this analytically uncomfortable despite the clarity of the operational balance, the hostage proposal. Not because it is operationally viable in the conventional military sense, but because it represents a category of desperation-driven decision-making that produces actions whose consequences are not fully understood by the people proposing them. An institution that is losing comprehensively and whose institutional culture does not permit the acknowledgement of loss will reach for options that seem to change the political dynamic, regardless of the military consequence. The hostage proposal is being floated in a parliament. It has not been executed. But the distance between floating it in Parliament and executing it through IRGC elements that still have the capability to attempt it is not as large as the analytical community would prefer. At 6:20 Eastern this morning, the waves began again. The smoke over Chabahar and Shiraz is still rising. The before and after imagery at completed strike sites shows the completeness of what American precision air power does when it arrives at a target without effective opposition. And in a parliament building in Tehran, a proposal sits on the record, floated, documented, not yet withdrawn, for an action that its proposers may not have fully thought through the consequences of executing. The bombs answer one set of questions. The parliament proposal opens a different one. And both are happening in the same morning, in the same conflict, against the same institution that said 47 years ago it would never be defeated. The waves are still coming, and Pickaxe Mountain is still waiting. There is a dimension of this 7-hour overnight strike wave that the numerical totals do not fully capture. The psychological effect on the IRGC's operational command structure of absorbing continuous precision strikes for 7 uninterrupted hours. Air defense commanders who have been tracking incoming threats for 7 consecutive hours, losing radar systems to Wild Weasel harm missiles, watching command nodes go offline as Tomahawks arrive at terrain-hugging altitude, managing a communications architecture that is being degraded in real time by the Growler's electronic warfare operations. These are not commanders who emerge from that experience with the institutional coherence required for coordinated, deliberate military decision-making. The 7-hour wave is not just a targeting exercise, it is an exhaustion operation. It runs the IRGC's defensive decision-making loop until the human beings operating that loop are depleted, disoriented, and making reactive choices rather than strategic ones. Every decision a depleted IRGC air defense commander makes at hour 6 of a 7-hour strike wave is worse than the decision he would have made at hour 1. The American campaign is designed to run the loop until the quality of Iranian decisions degrades below the threshold at which they constitute effective opposition. The before and after satellite imagery that CENTCOM released alongside the July 14th strike confirmation captures the endpoint of that process in visual form. In the before image, the Iranian installation is intact, infrastructure present, systems in place, the site functioning as a military facility. In the after image, everything is gone. Not damaged, not degraded, gone. Blast craters where structures stood, cleared ground where equipment had been positioned. The completeness of the destruction in the after image is itself a message to every Iranian military planner who is looking at comparable imagery of their own installations and calculating what their before and after will look like when the wave arrives there. The airport defenses in the strike footage deserve specific analysis because of what they indicate about American operational planning beyond the current phase. The footage shows strikes landing adjacent to runway infrastructure, targeting the defensive positions around an Iranian airport rather than the runway itself. The runway blockaded by the Iranians, obstacles placed across the tarmac to prevent American aircraft from landing, is being preserved while the defenses around it are removed. You do not take out airport defenses adjacent to a runway while leaving the runway itself intact unless you are thinking about whether that runway might have a future operational use. The clearing of airport defenses around an Iranian facility while leaving the landing surface available is not a detail the analytical community should pass over without noting what category of operation it might facilitate. The IRGC blockaded the runway because it assessed that American forces might want to use it. American forces took out the defenses while leaving the runway. The logic of that exchange implies a conversation between planners on both sides about the same potential future event. The Israeli timeline assessment deserves deeper analysis than the headline observation that Jerusalem believes war is coming. The specific framing matters, not that war might come, but that it will come, and the only question is when. The use of will rather than might reflects an Israeli intelligence community that has moved past probability assessment into something closer to certainty. Israeli analysts have been watching this conflict with the particular attention of a country whose survival depends on accurately reading Iranian military intentions and capabilities. The assessment that full-scale war is coming within weeks is not an alarmist projection from an interested party. It is the judgment of an intelligence apparatus that has access to signals, imagery, and human intelligence about Iranian military decision-making that is not available in the public domain. When that apparatus says there will be a war, the weight of that statement comes from sources that the public record cannot fully reflect. The collapse of the MOU, the Strait confrontation, and, critically, Tehran's latest moves, including the parliament's hostage proposal, are being read in Jerusalem not as individual escalatory signals, but as a convergent pattern that points to a specific conclusion. The Iranian side has lost the institutional ability to manage this conflict within the parameters that allowed the previous pause and reset cycles to function. An Iranian parliament that is publicly proposing hostage-taking is not an institution that has a viable ceasefire strategy. It is an institution under existential pressure, producing proposals whose operational consequences have not been fully thought through. That is the sign that the conflict has entered a phase where the next major escalation is not a decision that will be deliberately chosen, but an event that will be produced by the accumulated pressure on an institution that no longer has coherent decision-making at the required level. Jerusalem reads this, and Jerusalem is preparing to be ready when it arrives. The waves began again at 6:00 a.m. Eastern this morning. Chabahar is burning. Shiraz is under attack. Khuzestan's underground missile facilities have been struck. Airport defenses have been cleared adjacent to runways that the Iranians blockaded because they understood what clearing those defenses means. A parliament has proposed hostage-taking. Jerusalem has said the war is coming and the only question is when. And above all of it, visible on open-source tracking to anyone who looks, a P-8 Poseidon is orbiting, hunting submarines that open-source tracking cannot see. In an operational theater where everything below the surface is as active as everything above it, and where the full picture of American force posture is considerably larger than what any tracking system reveals. Pickaxe Mountain is still waiting. The waves are still coming. The only question is when.